Welcome to another episode of Don't Call It Small. I'm your host, Natasha Foreman. If you don't know me and you have no clue what this podcast is all about, let me share a bit. I'm the CEO of ForemanLLC, LLC, where we provide consulting, business support, and professional development services. And Don't Call It Small is where we talk all things business, share tips and news that you can use, and highlight the people and ideas behind the products and services that we buy. To learn more about our team, please visit ForemanLLC.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome back for another episode. I'm excited to be here with all of you. It's an absolute blessing. We have a interesting, dynamic, weighted conversation today. If this is your first time hanging with us, we're glad to have you, and we hope you enjoy your time and that you'll join us again. I want to dive into today's topic, and let me just kind of bring you up to speed. In episode 19, we discussed the business support services that your company needs. In episode 24, that was about building strong, healthy culture and teams, both professionally and personally. Episode 30, we talked about alternative benefit packages and covered various features and services that can benefit your team mentally, physically, and spiritually. In episode 31, we had employees and employers look through each other's lenses. During episode 32, we outlined how to find and select the right team members. Episode 34, we talked about stress, depression, and dis-ease, better known as disease, and how we're impacted individually and collectively. So today, let's deal with workplace issues like the various forms of harassment, which under that it entails bullying. And let's look at discrimination and the misinformation spread about affirmative action and much more. If you didn't already know, in addition to serving as a consultant and podcaster through Foreman Associates, I'm a college professor and I teach management and human resource management courses. My students are always amazed to discover that they were clueless about the various laws, practices, and policies that govern organizations in the United States. They also sheepishly admit that they didn't truly understand what affirmative action, sexual harassment, discrimination, bullying, and the numerous other layers of harassment consisted of. They had only scratched the surface while thinking they had dove deep in those waters. What I've realized over the years is that there is this case with the vast majority of people, regardless of where they're from, where they live, how much education they have, how much money they make, or their IQ. Ladies and gentlemen, your SAT and ACT scores can't help you here. Either you know it or you don't. And the issues that we see in the U.S., in our workplaces and communities make it abundantly clear that the masses simply don't know what they don't know. So let's look at these things. Let's fast track your learning today so you can walk enlightened with knowledge and stop walking around blinded by ignorance. The terms diversity and inclusion. Oh, yes. They've been soaring through employment atmosphere the past few months. I mean, really soaring. Organizations far and wide have been recruiting professionals to step in and help them address, overhaul, or pretty up their diversity inclusion needs within their companies. And at Foreman Associates, we focus heavily on diversity and inclusion within organizations and help with training and also some other things that are related to specific industries like construction. But with the everything that's been going on in 2020 as it's dealing with race and other factors, it's alarming to see this influx of these jobs. I mean, it's a positive thing, but at the same token, it's alarming because it lets you know just how many organizations have been overlooking or undervaluing it. It's also alarming because I fear that some leaders are focused mostly on the protected characteristics that most people initially identify with when we say diversity and inclusion, and that's race, gender, religion, and sexual orientation. And we should be mindful about these things. At the same time, diversity is much broader than those traditional four categories. Diversity represents how we are alike and unlike other people. It covers our capabilities, socioeconomic backgrounds, our experiences. It's our stories. It's about encompassing our differences and similarities, not one or the other, but both. Diversity considers at its core your personality, the mental and physical characteristics that make up your identity. Outside of that, are our internal dimensions of age, gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and physical ability. Then we're to go a step farther to our external dimensions of geographic location, personal and recreational habits, religion, work experience, educational background, income, parental and marital statuses, and appearance. And then within the organization, we have various dimensions that make up the fourth layer of diversity. And these dimensions include our seniority, functional level or classification, work location, our management status, and if and how we're affiliated with the union, what division or department or unit group we're part of, what field or work we're involved with. All of these things make up the dimensions and diversity within an organization. So when recruiting for diversity, you need to look at non-traditional labor pools, like workers over the age of 40. Yes, folks, if you're 40 and older, you're considered an older worker and you're protected by federal law. You're part of a protected class. The proportion of employed workers over the age of 65 rose to 16.8% in 2016. That's nearly 9 million people, and 36.1% of those individuals are working part-time. And now we know that those numbers are even more staggeringly high now in 2020. Men make up less than half of the 65 and older cohort. They make up roughly 55% of the workforce in their age group. We're also seeing more older workers coming out of retirement, a trend that's called unretirement, because older workers are living longer, they're healthier, and still have a lot to contribute to organizations. And now with this, everything, the pandemic of 2020, we're seeing a lot of people having to come out of unretirement or coming out of retirement into unretirement because out of sheer need and desperation, which is making the unemployment tolls even more challenging. There are a lot of things that we have to take in consideration when we look at age, and there are age stereotypes that are inaccurate and based on the belief that older workers are less motivated, less trusting, more resistant to change, less healthy, and more likely to have work-life balance problems. And this is something that is a prevailing, stereotype, because you'll have people that won't hire someone because they fear that I'm going to have to now invest more money in their health care, and of course they'll be closer to retirement, so I'm gonna have to pay out for this and that and the other. And it is really interesting because people believe these stereotypes. A study published in 2012 in the Personnel Psychology Journal refuted these stereotypes. The reality is that how could you feel that someone that's older is going to be less motivated, less trusting, more resistant to change, when, those older generations have been catalysts for change, right? These are certain stereotypes that we would normally apply to younger people. It's just really interesting how we do this, but we do it because it's easier to try to believe that as a truth, because it then justifies and rationalizes the decisions that we make to discriminate against older workers. The truth is that there's a wealth of knowledge and wisdom that employers are overlooking when choosing to not hire, promote, and properly align older workers. And some other non-traditional labor pools that you should consider are single parents, workers with disabilities or the differently abled, welfare to work candidates, long-term unemployed, previously incarcerated, veterans, multiracial, and multi-ethnic candidates. The highest minority group of unemployed workers are those who are differently abled, either mentally or physically. They are often overlooked despite their education and skill qualifications. And when I looked at the U.S. Census Bureau, about 5.67 million people in the United States have a physical or mental disability. However, only about 30% of those between ages 16 and 64 are unemployed, and they earn far less than those without a disability. Their monthly median income is $1,961, while those without a disability have a monthly median income of $2,724. This is a disturbing fact. Kessler Foundation conducted a survey of more than 3,000 supervisors, and the results show that 28% of respondents said that their organizations have disability hiring goals. One problem that supervisors reported was that their perception was that upper management was less committed to providing the training and accommodations that would be required for employees who needed them. What I find interesting is that employers, recruiters, and managers have a bias that somehow the differently abled would be less equipped to solve problems, be creative and innovative. But Helena Berger, the president of the American Association of People with Disabilities, made a comment that I wholeheartedly agree with. She said that, quote, having a disability may make you a better problem solver and more innovative, end quote. If someone has had to find innovative and creative ways to work around obstacles, to create solutions, to adapt to or overcome circumstances, why wouldn't you think they would be more than capable of doing so in your workplace? Recruiters and managers allow their bias and belief in stereotypes to rule their decisions about who to interview, who to hire, or who to reach, and how to go about reaching people. And members of the armed forces face employment challenges when trying to re-enter civilian jobs and careers. I've had numerous conversations with past and current students and others who are or were active duty military professionals, and there are a lot of stereotypes working against them from people outside of the military. Many employers have inaccurate beliefs that military professionals are out of touch with the needs of the business, they're bureaucratic and rigid. There's also the stigma with PTSD, as though post-traumatic stress only impacts the military. PTSD can happen after a traumatic birth, losing a loved one, from a near-death experience. It impacts victims of rape, bullying, emotional abuse, and violence, people involved in car accidents, natural disasters, and other tragedies. We have to remove the stigma associated with PTSD and other mental health disorders and illnesses. We also need to stop associating certain groups and classes of people as having it or being prone to have it. We have unemployed veterans because employers are stereotyping and discriminating against them out of pure ignorance. You have no clue which people around you, working with you and working for you, is dealing with some level or degree of PTSD. It's important to research, read, ask questions, seek answers, learn truth from fiction, get training, and start casting a greater net to get more qualified and quality job candidates. Another big reason our vets aren't being hired as much as they should is because managers and recruiters also struggle with translating military experience into non-military terms. This leaves the responsibility to the former service member to do. They have to learn how to convey their skills and experience in terms that employers can understand. But companies should also take the initiative to learn more about military career demands by asking for help from current employees or your friends and family that have military backgrounds. Research military websites to understand their core values and how that might align with your company's. Understand that automated resume screening programs screen out the resumes of veterans because they don't use the same lingo on their resumes. That means that the candidate doesn't even get the chance to explain how and why they're a good fit for your company. The resume never makes it to your inbox. One solution is to consider adding keywords like veteran, military, even adding the branches of the military, and service member. It's another keyword that you can put to help widen the search criteria. Another source of talent that is grossly overlooked are our previously incarcerated. People serve time in jail or in prison, but when they are reintroduced to the world outside of those walls, bars, and barriers, they face a harsh reality. People aren't so willing to give them a second chance, and really a third or a fourth or a fifth. The statistics show that 1 in 3 adults have a criminal record, and many of them can't get a job. With more than 650,000 people being released from jails and prison each year, that's a lot of unemployed people who have untapped talent. In 2019, it was said that we needed 7.8 million jobs filled in 2020 due to our job shortage. Now, factor in the devastation caused by COVID-19, and those numbers are probably closer to 9 million jobs, right? And something that I always want people to always consider is this. People that are in jail or in prison are people that were caught doing something or in the wrong place at the wrong time, right? And so I want you to think about all the things that you have done that could be deemed a crime, whatever the case may be, and or consider all the times that you could have been in the wrong place at the wrong time. that you didn't have the finances to be able to have a lawyer to fight aggressively for your freedom. You could be one of those people, right? Sitting, looking at a bar, these rows of bars, not free, and then coming out on your release date and not having the options that you should, all right, as a citizen of this country. In 2019, the Society of Human Resource Management, SHRM, created a pledge that all of their 350 chapters have signed, and more than 1,000 companies, trade associations, and nonprofits have also signed. It's called the Getting Talent Back to Work Pledge. According to SHRM, more than 82% of hiring managers indicated workers with a criminal history are at least as effective in their jobs as those without a criminal history. 74% of those same hiring managers went even further, indicating that diminished costs associated with hiring from this population, coupled with effective risk mitigation, provide extreme value for their organizations. So they see this, but we have to translate that into action so that we can actually get people and to work then and utilize them based on their strengths and their skills and not on their previous offenses and weaknesses. So President Trump signed the First Step Act into law in December 2018, and that act is slated to reduce sentences for nonviolent offenders in federal prisons and improves programs to reduce recidivism, such as those promoting workforce readiness. And you can argue that he did this to make it easier for white-collar offenders to get lighter sentences, which is true, because historically and currently, federal prisons house a majority of white-collar inmates, such as tax evaders, people who've committed fraud, Ponzi scheme masters, and the like. Someone could argue, does that fact matter if all nonviolent offenders in federal prisons can have reduced sentences? And the answer is no, not really. But it would be an added benefit if this was also tied to reform to drug sentencing laws and also had an impact or influence on state sentencing of non-violent offenders, since prosecutors can always use that as a loophole to continue to seek longer sentences on both the federal and the state level. And we know that federal imprisonment is usually carries a much stiffer penalty. But we can't argue that this is all progress. Even if he's motivated by personal factors, it's still a tick in the right direction. We have a tendency of welcoming certain white-collar criminals back into the fold because we see the value of their wealth of knowledge. We're not so welcoming of blue-collar criminals, however. Stealing is stealing, yet we give a pass to the person who conned people out of millions, and we shun the person who stole food to feed their family. People should not continue to be punished after serving their time in jail or prison, period. Imagine how many jobs you could create and fill if you broadened your view and reach and considered non-traditional job candidates. Visit gettingtalentbacktowork.org for more details about SHRM's Getting Talent Back to Work program and to sign their pledge. All right, now, let's look deeper into job discrimination. Some barriers to diversity include the bias that I've mentioned repeatedly. There are also stereotypes and prejudices, and of course, there is blatant racism. And some other barriers that many people may be unaware of or choose not to admit is that we have a fear of discrimination against majority group members. And you're like, what is that? And that is where, in seeking greater diversity, there's fear that there will be bias against the majority group. In most cases, white males. So here's an example. Google has received a lawsuit from an engineer they used to employ who wrote a long memo that went public. In the memo, he said why he believed women weren't inherently suited for jobs in technology. When he was fired, he sued Google, claiming that the company discriminates against conservative white men. No, dude. In your example, Google didn't tolerate misogynist and sexist. Period. A white recruiter from YouTube claimed that YouTube retaliated against him after he completed, he did this video. He completed on the video site. He said that they discriminate. How was it? He said that they discriminate against white and Asian male applicants in favor of hiring blacks, Hispanics, and women. If you're kind of laughing, I get it. Frivolous lawsuits like this can discourage management from casting wider recruiting nets to have more diverse workplaces. It's important to be vigilant in your pursuit to have a broader and greater representation of humankind. People start to scream, "Oh, this is affirmative action all the way." And I always laugh because people don't fully understand affirmative action. And if you're one of them, don't worry, you'll learn today in this episode. But these examples that I've just shared were on race and gender, but there have been instances where people fear recruiting the differently abled because of fear of recourse from employees and candidates who are considered able-bodied. Can you believe it? Yep, it's true. It is so true. Just kind of makes you I don't know, shake your head. So here's a second thing is lack of support for family demands. That's another diversity barrier, as we're seeing less two-parent working households, either because it's a single-family household or only one parent is working, and it's still usually women who are primarily that are taking care of the children in domestic work. If an organization doesn't support flexible work hours and job responsibilities, it makes it difficult for the woman to work evenings, weekends, take overnight business trips, so on and so forth. And companies can and should do more. I think that it has been proven with COVID-19 pandemic that companies can convert jobs partially or wholly to remote work, allowing greater flexibility. Or adjusting work hours. Honestly, does every company need its workers to align to the same 8 to 5, 9 to 5, 9 to 6 work shifts? No. 3, the third barrier. When employees view the organization as being fair to all types of employees, employee loyalty is promoted and performance is increased. When people feel free to express their ideas and beliefs without fear of negative consequences, there is greater psychological safety. These factors make up a positive diversity climate. Now, let me be clear. The examples that I shared earlier with the Google and YouTube lawsuits, those aren't what I mean about psychological safety. You should expect a negative recourse when you make disparaging remarks about other people. Your First Amendment rights don't protect you in the workplace. Okay? Where the employer is bound by law to protect the very workers and people you are verbally attacking, whether it's slander or libel. No. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, has guidelines that data requested on application forms must be job-related. Though frequently found on application forms, there are several questions that are illegal, such as marital status, height and weight, number of age and age of dependents, information on your spouse, date of high school graduation, emergency contact information, social security number. There's also been litigation surrounding questions regarding age and gender of a candidate. Yeah. There are sex role stereotypes. Yes, built on the belief, and some of you play right into them. They're built on the belief that different traits and abilities make males and females better suited for certain roles. We do it in the household every time, right? It's just startling. So the very things that we think in the home, we bring into the workplace, and that is why, according to a Gallup poll, 33% of people prefer a male boss, while 20% prefer a female boss in a new job. Which is interesting since Pew Research findings show that people generally view women as being every bit as capable as men as being leaders, but we just naturally gravitate to that mindset. And then you add to that women of color are more negatively affected by sexual stereotypes than white women or men in general. According to a 2015 article in the Journal of Applied Psychology that focused on meta-analysis of gender stereotypes and bias, it really goes deep into that, and so that's another mountain to have to climb. Another recent study shows that entrepreneurs who displayed traits that were stereotypically associated with women, such as being warm, sensitive, so on and so forth, were less likely to have venture capitalists accept their proposal. Yet those who exhibited what is perceived as masculine traits, like aggressiveness and assertiveness, were more likely to have their proposal accepted. Bias kicks in during the resume application screening. We zoom in on names that, in our opinion, sound ethnic or foreign, and then we dissect and scrutinize the applicant's writing style, educational level, type of degree, the schools they attended, whatever you can find. So, of course, knowing that a candidate has been charged with or convicted of a crime, bias can consume a recruiter's mind. You already have all these other things, this smorgasbord of stuff. You add that, it's a wrap for the candidate. Some people think that they aren't biased. They claim to just have a feeling about certain people. That's called implicit bias. The National Center for State Courts wrote a document called Helping Courts Address Implicit Bias, Frequently Asked Questions, where they noted that more than 85% of Americans consider themselves unprejudiced. But researchers conclude that most of us hold some degree of implicit racial bias. Implicit bias has been at the forefront of public discussion as the number of deaths of Black Americans by law enforcement officers continue to rise at staggering rates. Implicit bias appears in our employment-related decisions. There was a study that showed that racism led to discriminatory decisions in hiring and performance evaluations. You factor in ageism, and that's also impacted discriminatory hiring decisions. Your bias against someone that's younger than you or older than you is leading you to discriminate against candidates. Yet you would be outraged if someone ever called you out on this fact. If you're looking to disqualify candidates, then you're really looking for anything and everything to eliminate them from the pool. And that is a bad approach to take. You should be asking yourself, how does this person fit, enhance, or add to our corporate culture and values? In what ways do they positively stand out? What does their resume or their application say that makes me want to get to know them better? Ask them specific questions. Don't assume a poorly written resume or application is a direct correlation to the type of work they will perform for your company. It could be a language barrier, or they could be a person of few words, but bold actions. You don't know. And please, don't be a snob and say, well, they should pay someone to spruce up their resume. Come on now. Get your head out of your butt for a moment. Resume writing services aren't dirt cheap, and having to pay someone to write upwards of 5 different kinds of resumes to speak to 5 different types of jobs or companies can be expensive. You have to get past your bias. Utilize other qualifiers or disqualifiers, and not just the resume application screening to flag the candidate for the next round or to eliminate them from the process. I think that I'm going to dedicate an episode or two on the recruiting, selection, and onboarding stages. Like, just really kind of dig down into the nitty-gritty of that. Because it bothers me. It's an irritant. I have a lot of pet peeves in those stages that really irk me. All right, let's get back to discrimination. If discrimination is present with an organization, it's most likely driven by the organizational culture developed by the senior leaders. Culture within organizations is defined by implicit assumptions that are taken for granted and shared by a group that determines how it thinks about, perceives, and reacts to various environments and people within those environments. So it's created and shaped at the tippity top of your company. And you can guarantee that an organization with a leader that is trigger happy to say, you're fired, has a work environment that is hostile, toxic, and filled with stress. Organizational culture is driven by the founders' values, their national culture, industry and business environment, behavior of the organization's leaders, and the vision and strategies of the organization. So let's address some preconceptions that really do need to be addressed. There's an assumption that illegal immigrants are dramatically affecting the U.S. economy. However, the American Immigration Council reports that undocumented workers only represent 5% of the civilian workforce. So 95% of the workforce are either documented or citizens, or, they're a combination, like they're not undocumented. So unlike the propaganda that would make you believe that at least 50% of the workforce are undocumented, it's only 5%. And if you think that the 5% are rapists, murderers, and whatever, you need to take some training courses with Foreman and Associates so we can help you through this. All right. Another preconception is that customer bias favoring white men has just about disappeared, and this is untrue. A study of college students showed that people give higher ratings for customer satisfaction to white men than to women and other minorities. And it is true. Young workers are earning less than before. So let's just go ahead and put that out there. Their wages have inched up only about 1.4% above the year 2000 levels, which may reflect a wider problem of wage stagnation across all workers. As I mentioned in previous episodes, employers are discriminating against older workers to opt for younger workers because they can get away with paying the younger workers less while working the mess out of them. I mean, it's unfair. We're positioning younger workers to be worse off than their parents' generation. We're supposed to be setting them up for success. So let's go back to affirmative action. We're going to quickly learn what affirmative action is and is not. Affirmative action consists of proactive employment practices to compensate for historical discrimination against racial and ethnic minorities, individuals with disabilities, and women. Yes, all women, including white women. I highlight that fact because there have been countless white women arguing against affirmative action, not realizing that they are one of the categories that benefit from affirmative action. It's enforced by 3 federal executive orders, 11246, 11375, and 11478, which affects the employment practices of federal contractors and subcontractors. It's not about preferential treatment of these protected groups. It's about equity and fairness as it relates to them because they have historically faced discrimination. Affirmative action was put in place to address, correct, and end discrimination in the workplace and in educational institutions. There's an expectation that good faith efforts are made to include rather than exclude candidates. But for whatever reason, people quickly think of quota systems that have been used in the past by colleges and companies. And that's not equity. And no right-minded person wants to be selected as part of a quota. They don't want to be a token. There's a few, right? There's a few on every plantation. But I said right-minded person. That's why I find it disturbing that Asian Americans filed a lawsuit against Harvard claiming that they were discriminated against in exchange for other racial minorities to get the slots they felt they instead deserved. The plaintiffs, students for fair admission, have no clue that they're actually being pimped and pandered by a man who has no desire to see Asians at Harvard or any other U.S. university or college. Just saying. Edward Blum, a longtime crusader against affirmative action who's raised millions of dollars from conservative groups to challenge voting rights laws and affirmative action policies, and he's been very successful doing so. Let's just be very clear. He wants to do away with affirmative action since his attempt years earlier blew up in his face. He switched from the young white female student who claimed discrimination to find another group to manipulate. And he even filed a lawsuit against the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, arguing that the university could bring in more Black and Hispanic students, albeit of slightly lower academic caliber, if it used race-neutral alternatives. That's a load of crap, and you and I know it. Come on now. Let's just cut through it. That's all it is. The plaintiffs in the Harvard case say that Harvard's using a quota system and discriminating against them, which is interesting since Asians make up like the highest percentage of the non-whites at Harvard. And I think it's 20-something% or something like that. And let me further enlighten you that the fact that Asians are not just Japanese, Chinese, Taiwanese, Vietnamese, Cantonese, Malaysian, and Filipino, and the litany of other Asian groups. Asians also include Indians from India, right? So you've got all of those countries clustered together that make up this umbrella. And all of them, right? All of them are protected by the 1964 Civil Rights Act and benefit from affirmative action. About 12 students that make up the plaintiffs are upset that they didn't get into Harvard. They feel that 12 other students took their place because of race. They feel that they weren't selected because they were Asian American, which means that they obviously don't think that 12 white students took their spots or 12 wealthy, very well-connected, legacy-rich students took their spots. Or how about this biggie to swallow? They just didn't make the cut. They didn't have a well-rounded portfolio of experiences and knowledge beyond test scores to get in. That is a pill that other students swallow and move right along and mosey down the road. But for this group, they can't fathom that they simply aren't Harvard material. They didn't get into Harvard. Their focus was Harvard. They've been thinking about Harvard their whole lives. Their parents said they'd go to Harvard. So why didn't I get into Harvard? Oh, I didn't get into Harvard because I'm Asian. So I read this New York Times article from February, where Harvard says its admission system is calibrated to produce a spectrum of diversity, and it's not just focused on race only, but it includes income, ideas, geographic origin, and talents. And Harvard said that the group's appellate filing, quote, further exposes their ultimate goal of removing the consideration of race in college and university admissions. Harvard even pointed out that admissions officers weren't just looking at the larger group of Asians that most people naturally think about, but they were also focusing on more disadvantaged groups like Cambodians and Vietnamese. So you could argue that Harvard was being mindful that some groups of people may not have the money to attend the university, but their lives tell a story as robust and rich as Harvard's. It is more than just race and nationality. It's about the buffet of features that make us uniquely us. And at the same time, it can also be about how wide and long your parents' pockets are. Oh, don't get it twisted. There is bias within the admissions offices of countless colleges and universities, big, small, medium. There's always been backdoor negotiations. There'll always be backdoor negotiations, which proves it's not just what you know, it's who you know that gets you through doors of opportunity. However, it's not all about the money, because in that case, Harvard's entire student body would be nothing but wealthy kids, and we know that's not the truth. There's plenty of Harvard students serving burgers and milkshakes, working a few jobs, and washing cars, trying to make ends meet. Edward Blum is a tenacious one, I'll just say. He and the other plaintiffs have spent 6 years fighting Harvard. The lawsuit was first filed in 2014. A judge ruled against them in 2018, but Blum isn't done fighting. He's stirring things back up earlier this year, and I wonder if the same students from 2014 are still trying to get into Harvard. I mean, are they? Have they not enrolled and completed their studies at other universities by now? I mean, I'm just wondering that. Well, I want to just keep things real. Okay, so we're going to keep it real. If the testing scandal of 2019 didn't reinforce it, the wealthy and influential always find loopholes to get their children into all of the right places. The well-connected will also try to find loopholes to dismantle systems that are established to provide equity from those historically marginalized, disadvantaged, and discriminated against. That's why non-black students who are able to find a loophole in the term minority when applying to historically black colleges and universities, HBCUs, as being non-black would make you a minority at those institutions. So they were able to come in under that classification. What I want you to consider is why in the world would Students for Fair Admission attack affirmative action and blame other racial minorities when they could have attacked the legacy list that clearly enrolled the children of wealthy donors, which would mean taking spots from equally or more qualified candidates? I can't help but to reach one conclusion. Is because, number one, Blum is not concerned about that. And number two, the Asian and Latino and black groups that are part of these two different lawsuits don't realize they're only pawns in a bigger war that will actually really exclude them if Edward Blum is successful with his attacks. You know, the lawsuit at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Blum is using race to attack race, to eliminate race from the equation so that those who have been historically disadvantaged will be further burdened in their quest for access and equity. It's sad that the students involved in this suit don't see that they are being played. I wouldn't be surprised if Blum's motivation all of these years is driven by his disdain for not being accepted into his university of choice and thinking that he lost out to a racial minority. So he has been on a quest of vendetta to dismantle what he sees as an unfair advantage. I mean, that's just how it looks. I mean, it walks like a duck, it quacks like a duck. I mean, it's sad. It's pitiful. The University of Texas at Austin, Blum's alma mater, I don't think that they taught him this. What is disappointing is that if there weren't the backdoor legacy money moves, then Harvard and other colleges and universities would not be threatened by these pending lawsuits. If everything was straight up and up and you really just factored on those different variables that they discussed, that is looking holistically at these students, and that no one could be able to buy their way, donate their way, smooth their way in, this wouldn't be an issue. It would just be a straight, here are all the factors, and we're looking at all of these things, right? But let's also look at some other major factors that lean towards Harvard's favor. Harvard has a very low acceptance rate. According to the website Top Tier Admissions, Harvard recently accepted only 895 students for the graduating class of 2024. That's for their early applicants. That's from a pool of 6,424 early applicants. That's a 13.9% rate right there, right? 10.1% are first-generation college students, 9.6% of the students are international, 51.7% are women, with a large percentage of them majoring in computer science and physical sciences. The overall estimated enrollment for 2020 will be 1,670 students. 43.83% of this incoming class are early enrollment students. Only 4.92% of applicants were actually admitted this year, right? Only 4.92%. These numbers are considerably less than the graduating classes of 2012 to 2018. For the class of 2012, they received more than 16,000 early enrollment applications. That's over 10,000 more than this year's incoming 2024 class. In comparison to the other Ivy League 2024 incoming classes, Cornell's acceptance rate is 23.8%, Dartmouth is 8.8%, University of Penn's acceptance rate is 8.07%, Brown has a 6.9% acceptance rate, Yale's is 6.54%, Columbia's is 6.1%, and Princeton's is 5.55%. And when you look at Edward Blum's alma mater, the University of Texas at Austin, their acceptance rate is around 39%. So I can see why he'd be on a warpath against Harvard. I just don't know why he's now focused on UNC at Chapel Hill. Someone tinkled in his cornflakes, obviously. Crazy thing is, Edward Blum and other people like him are entitled, and because of that entitlement, they aim to destroy the very systems that protect the disenfranchised. Folks, Harvard has historically maintained low acceptance and enrollment numbers, which means that competition is fierce, which also means that more people will do whatever it takes to get in, whether through manipulation, bribery, or lawsuits. And the students who have been busting their butts, full, rounded, holistic, just, candidates are being overlooked. And the thing is, they're okay because they understand that Harvard has like the lowest acceptance rate. You know that you're just like tossing that dice and hoping it works in your favor. But you're not putting all your eggs in your Harvard basket. Anyone who puts all of their eggs in that basket, you're either naive, you're ignorant, or you just have, you just expect that mommy and daddy are going to get me into Harvard. But everyone else, you understand that you are applying to several other universities and colleges. You're not expecting to get into just one. I remember I have a high school friend who did that. She applied to one university, her dream university, and her whole life seemed shattered when she didn't get into it. And so versus going to a junior college, not too far from home, she went way out in the boonies so that she wouldn't have to face anyone else. No one else would see her on that campus because in her mind she failed. But one thing I know is that she did not sue that university. And guess what? She's Asian. Now, let's pivot from discrimination and bias to bullying and harassment. Bullying and harassment are behaviors that can be perceived as humiliating, threatening, oppressive, or infringing on someone's human rights. It can happen in person, online, over the phone, wherever, right? I mean, you can mail me something. You can, the routes are endless. And according to the EEOC, harassment is unwelcome conduct that's based on race, color, religion, sex, including pregnancy, national origin, age, 40 and older, remember, 40 and older, disability or genetic information. Harassment becomes unlawful where, one, you're enduring the offensive conduct becomes a condition of continued employment, or two, the conduct is severe or pervasive enough to create a work environment that is reasonable, that a reasonable person would consider intimidating, hostile, or abusive. You notice the word reasonable. We have a lot of unreasonable people around, but we have more reasonable people out there. Bullying occurs over an extended period of time. It can lead to serious physical and emotional damage to the person being targeted, resulting in lost time from work and lower productivity. It could lead to workplace violence. It can also lead to higher turnover. And the same is true of all harassment, right? No matter if you're talking about sexual harassment, whatever, all the forms of harassment, this can happen. And let's remember that misconduct is not just peer-to-peer. It's also manager to employee and vice versa. It's also mistreatment from customers, vendors, suppliers, and other outsiders. We have seen endless videos of customers berating and harassing and abusing employees at a location. And the thing is that, and they feel entitled to do so. Those employees are protected by law, and those employers must do everything in their power to protect, but also to right that wrong. According to the EEOC, offensive conduct may include, but is not limited to, offensive jokes, slurs, epithets, or name-calling, physical assaults or threats, intimidation, ridicule or mockery, insults or put-downs, offensive objects or pictures, and interference with work performance. You turn around and you're showing some pictures of somebody tooting their butt, dropping it like it's hot, twerking, or some form of violence, or something that like, for instance, when folks were circulating pictures of President Obama, and it was all of these disparaging and racial morphings of his face and of his family's face. These are all offensive. And harassment can occur in a variety of circumstances, including but not limited to, the harasser can be your manager, your supervisor. It could be a supervisor in another area, an agent of your employer, a coworker. It could be a non-employee. It can be, as I said, one of your customers. It could be a vendor or supplier. The victim does not have to be the person harassed. It can also be someone who is just affected by the offensive conduct. I can see it, I can hear it, and I don't like it. So I'm speaking out about it. Unlawful harassment can occur without economic injury to or discharge of the victim. People who are bullied and harassed typically quit their jobs rather than remain, and they try to work through the organization's complaint mechanisms, red tape, right? They don't want to deal with it because they don't believe it. They don't have trust in the system within that organization to protect them. They fear retaliation. They fear it's just, things are just going to go on and nothing's going to be resolved. And some workers may even choose to sue the company and the harasser. That could be costly because if the worker can provide proof that they reported the hostile work environment and that management didn't do anything to address and resolve the issues, the organization could be found liable. One thing that troubles me is that we have not created an environment, when we're looking at the different forms of harassment, that supports men who are being harassed by other men and by women. Somehow we keep finding ways to, it's weird because we emasculate men in one example, and then we turn them into these raging lunatics in another example, right? These bloodthirsty, crotch-grabbing, crazed people in this other example. And our natural inclination is to think of sexual harassment occurring by men towards women, but men also harass other men, and women harass women and men, and women bully other women and men, just as men do the same. It's open season for harassers, so we should create systems and practices that support and protect our workers and discipline the violators. It makes it easier when the organization is not led by a bully. You can't change bad behavior when the fool is steering the vehicle. Like, does that make sense? That's why there has to be full adoption and compliance from the top. Everyone in your organization should take part in extensive training and addressing the issues that impact workers on each level of the organization. Workers have an expectation that their employers will protect them. The laws protect workers even when their employers are the predators. Courts have used the employee handbooks against employers in lawsuits by stating that the employers broke their implied contract with their employees. Employers also face litigation for not having an employee handbook with clear HR policies. So what does your employee handbook say about workplace conduct? How does it specifically address harassment and civility policies, disciplinary procedures, professional behavior and attire, compensation and benefits, general employment policies, so on and so forth? If your company doesn't have an employee handbook, you need to create one now, like last week, like last month. Stop playing around. You can always contact Foreman & Associates, LLC, to see if we could create one for your organization. If your company has an employee handbook, examine it. Is it thorough? Is it current, accurate? Or is it fluff and better as a coaster to rest your coffee cup on? Or, I don't know, when you run out of toilet paper, use it as that. Your handbook should be revisited and revised when new issues are encountered or workplace changes require it. Handbooks and policies should be reviewed at least once a year. They should also be made available as a digital handbook, allowing workers to access it online. Does your organization have a dedicated HR team? Does the head of HR work side by side with your senior, mid-level, and frontline leadership teams to help align your human talent needs with the strategic, tactical, and operational plans that leaders are focused on? If not, why not? Does your organization have a dedicated response team to train, address, and resolve workplace issues? When organizations don't have trained response teams, then the issues are bound to surface, erupt, and flow into every crevice of your organization. If you're a one-man team or, you're the only, senior leader, you have a small organization, then guess what? You're going to either be wearing those hats yourself or you need to be able to outsource it. One of the biggest reasons why violators of employment laws, rules, and policies continue to violate is because they aren't disciplined. And when they are, it may not be with fairness and consistency. It may not be intense enough. So let's explore this. There are 4 major challenges in employee discipline. Let's first start with the fairness and consistency. Both sound easy to do, but honestly, it's not as simple as it sounds. It's about equity, and same offense should receive the same punishment. That's just like how we feel, like common sense, right? But how many times do we make allowances for friends, family members, our crush, right? How often do managers allow their bias to rule their decision making? More times than anyone can count. We've seen employees fired for the same offense that their managers only got a slap on the wrist for. We also know of senior leaders being the offenders and their crimes go unpunished, sometimes forever. That is why people fear the powerful and well-connected, because they seem to get away with everything that the average person can't even fathom. That is why the Me Too movement took off with great force, because when you realize you're not alone, you're not an anomaly, an outlier, you stop walking in shame and start speaking up in strength. And let's be clear, the Me Too movement is not just for women to speak up and share. It's for all genders who have been subjected to the imbalance leveraged in the favor of their harasser. When we talk about fairness and consistency, there are some things we just see as true, right, and just. A repeat offender should receive a harsher punishment than a first-time offender, right? Yep. But just like on the streets, in the suites, we see repeat offenders and first-time offenders receive the same punishment, or the first-timer gets a harsher punishment in an attempt to prove a point. When work conditions change over time, the company should update work rules and level of reprimand. Disciplinary action should be taken without regard to employees' protected status characteristics such as age, gender, religion, race, veteran, mobility, etc. However, there are numerous examples of companies keeping old rules and levels of reprimand from years and decades ago. Nothing updated, just the same old, same old. And we know that people are disciplining people based on their protected status characteristics. Someone's bias kicks in and all ethics get tossed out the window. So this leads me to the next challenge. Documentation problems. Many people who have been written up would assume that most companies are obsessed with documenting disciplinary and other issues, but the truth is, even in companies that stress document everything, when managers aren't properly trained on why, how, and when to document, the process can be inconsistent, sloppy, and incomplete. There should be documentation on the performance and behavior expectations of the company. If there's failure to comply, if there were any prior warnings, whatever counseling, coaching that's been implemented, expectations for future conduct, the consequences if there's failure to correct these deviations and deficiencies. The problem that arises with this process is that managers' bias can interfere, and oftentimes managers focus more on the employee's intentions rather than the desired results. And they can also have too much or not enough detail written in the report. Specific consequences just aren't outlined clearly. And specific examples of the employee's behaviors aren't thoroughly described. So you have these different dynamics that come in. Either you have this long-winded report or a report that barely scratches the surface of letting you know what's going on. And then you could have, something that's, we don't know what the consequences are. We're not sure what they really mean. And then there's another example where we really don't know what the employee did to get the write-up or to get fired. If there's no specific standard for documentation, there can be a hodgepodge of reporting, and managers should be properly trained on recording and tracking performance problems, on how to hold a disciplinary meeting, how to follow up after the meeting. A lot of managers don't want to be bothered with the paperwork, but that paperwork can be the difference between a lawsuit and an amicable resolution. It can be the difference between keeping your job and being fired for negligence or some other offense. Which leads me to the fourth challenge, reluctance to discipline. Oh yeah, this is a biggie. There are a lot of examples of the tyrant manager who's quick to yell, "You're fired!" Yeah, those schmucks are real irritants, aren't they? We have some people in the world who are power hungry and are driven by the whimpering of the people they punish. They get off on punishing people. And then you have other managers and leaders who are reluctant to use discipline. They keep letting things slide in hopes that the problem will just go away on its own or through someone else's efforts. And there's some reasons behind all this. There's reasons they avoid disciplining, and I'm going to share some of those. The first one is guilt. I mean, you remember that you too used to be an employee in that position with some of those same obstacles, and you may have been guilty of committing the same act. A second reason is fear of loss of friendship, right? You don't want to damage your relationship with your friends, your people. And yep, friends and family often run amok in an organization, all because they're the friend or family member of the person in charge. A third reason is avoidance of time loss. It takes time and effort to discipline someone. So some managers find it easier just to avoid it altogether, especially if they think their decision is going to be overturned by higher management. Fourth reason, lack of support. If higher management doesn't support your decisions, then you're less likely to discipline and in some cases even reward workers, right? Because you just don't feel like your decisions are going to be supported. When higher managers reverse those decisions, it undermines your authority and it can harm your effectiveness. Remember, adults are just oversized children. The moment one child realizes that mommy and daddy are going to reverse your orders and decisions, the child knows that you don't have any real power up in here. And they will exploit the mess out of this. They will intentionally ignore and defy you just because they know nothing is going to happen. Sound familiar? That leads to reason number 5, organizational culture that avoids discipline. If the norm is to avoid it, then managers are going to follow suit. We're just going to follow right in line, right? 6th reason, fear of lawsuits. Some people just fear being sued, folks. That's, it's oftentimes supported by an organizational culture that's rooted in this same fear. And if managers fear being sued for disciplining a worker, especially when that discipline leads to job termination, managers may opt to do nothing at all. That's why you need to be properly trained on documentation and how to hold a disciplinary meeting. When you have the signed paperwork to prove your actions, that the employee knew and acknowledged the consequences, that you exhausted all of the levels and stages to remedy the situation, lawsuits then aren't worth the paper they're printed on. Now, I already know that there are some of you listening who work in or have companies in at-will states, so you may mention at-will employment. At-will employment can also be a challenge when dealing with employee discipline because there's potential for formally stating a disciplinary process in your handbook that undercuts your at-will provisions. So your team needs to speak with a lawyer about the development of both an at-will provision and a discipline procedure that reconciles these two issues. What you don't want to face is a case where there's no fairness and consistency and little to no documentation of problems. That, my friends, could be a costly recipe to concoct. Let me give you an example. As part of your at-will policies, you have a zero tolerance for workplace violence. 2 workers are fighting, you immediately terminate both of them, but here's the dilemma. One of those workers was being bullied and was attacked by the other worker. The one attacked was merely defending themselves. They were not the initiator. Even if they were whooping up on the bully real good, like some WWE SmackDown or some cage fighting type of beating, but they didn't initiate the fight. They were defending themselves. So do you terminate that worker for defending themselves? Or, I would say no. The bully should be fired and the company should support the other worker if they choose to pursue legal recourse against the bully. That is something you need to consider when creating or updating an employee handbook because not everything is clear cut. That is why the use of disclaimers in your handbook are important because you can convey information about important employment limitations, exclusions, etc. Now, the EEOC has 4 checklists that address leadership and accountability, anti-harassment policy, a harassment reporting system and investigations, and compliance training. They also have a chart of risk factors and responsive strategies that your team can review. So visit the EEOC.gov to access these and other resources. As you can tell from this lengthy conversation, these topics and issues are not something that you should just gloss over. Don't just copy and paste another company's employee handbook, diversity policies, etc. You have to own every element of your organization and the people who make it run, internally and externally. This is literally about the life of your company and the people in it. You must protect the people to protect the entity. I don't know however way to stress it. I really don't. But it's that time, y'all. It's that time. It's time to go our separate ways. We're going to wrap up. If you have any questions or suggestions about this show, please email them to us at don'tcallitsmallbiz@gmail.com. I want to leave you with a quote from William Sloane Coffin Jr. He said that diversity may be the hardest thing for a society to live with, and perhaps the most dangerous thing for a society to be without. Yes, let that resonate for a second. Yeah. So, with that, be sure to check us out on Facebook. And we're on Instagram at ForemanLLC. Same with Twitter. Our podcast Twitter handle is It Ain't Small. Be sure to follow us and share us with your friends, colleagues, and family. And of course, I am on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn at Natasha L. Foreman. Please follow me, reach out, say hello, share your story. I look forward to meeting you. I've been meeting a lot of great people over this year that we've had the Don't Call It Small podcast. July 3rd, that was our 1-year anniversary. Whoop, whoop. I'm kind of hyped with this music. I want to make sure I give proper credit for our show theme song. It's called Higher Up. It's by Shane Ivers. Thank you for tuning into the Don't Call It Small Business podcast, for sharing these episodes with others, and for your continued support. And don't forget what I tell you on each and every episode. Don't call what you're planning, thinking, dreaming, or doing, little or small. Go big, go bold, or go nowhere. I'll see you here for our next episode Goodness, our next episode will be with Dr. Steve Woodsmall. We're going to be talking about leadership and all the different nuances that's taking place with COVID-19. So be sure to check in for those updates. That's going to be tomorrow. I'm so excited. Have a super awesome day, an awesome week. Stay safe. Be blessed.